frankly, everywhere. Ending the pandemic and maintaining robust support for an equitable, inclusive global economic recovery were the top priorities of our nations as we got together. We know we can't achieve one without the other. That is, we have to deal with the pandemic and in order to be able to deal with economic recovery, which, as we're doing in the States, but we committed that we're going to do more for the rest of the world as well. The fact is that the U.S. contribution is the foundation to work out how we're going to deal with the 100 nations that are poor and having trouble finding vaccines and having trouble dealing with reviving their economies if they were in the first place in good shape. And I committed that we would provide $500 million beyond the 80 million we've already done, 500 million doses of Pfizer vaccine, which we contracted to pay for. In addition to money we put into the COVID project, which is that COVID is, I know you all know, but a lot of people may not know what COVID is. That is a system whereby they're going to provide funding for states to be able to get access to vaccines on their own as well. But the bottom line is what that generated was a commitment by the rest of our colleagues at the G7 that they would provide another $500 million. So we're going to have 1 billion doses of vaccine. And in our case, that includes sharing more than not just the 1 billion doses overall, but we're going to provide for 200 million of those doses by the end of the year, another 300 million by the first half of next year. And so it was greeted with some enthusiasm, and we've agreed to work together so that the world is better prepared to detect and deal with future pandemics, because there will be future pandemics. We have I'm sure you've seen it. If you haven't, you'll get it, a joint statement we put out of the G7. You've seen it, I'm sure. And we are committed to follow on to do some significant work, including not only how we deal with the distribution and help in getting shots in arms for the rest of the world, but how we're going to deal with putting together a mechanism to anticipate and deal with and be aware of the next pandemic when it comes along. And there will be others.
Mr. President, Vladimir Putin, thank you. Vladimir Putin, who you'll be seeing in a few days in Geneva, said just a couple of days ago that he believed that U.S.-Russia relations were at a low point. In what concrete ways could your summit change that? And then secondly, on the same topic, you have said previously and in the run-up to the summit that you would be unafraid to call out Russia's disruptive actions like cyber hacks, Ukraine, election interference. But you're not having a joint press conference with Putin. Why not take the chance to stand side by side with him and say those things to him with the world watching?
Well, let me make it clear. I think he's right. It's a low point. And it depends on how he responds to acting consistent with international norms, which in many cases he has not. As I told him when I was running and when I got elected, before I was sworn in, that I was going to find out whether or not he in fact did engage in trying to interfere in our election, that I was going to take a look at whether he was involved in a cybersecurity breach that occurred, et cetera. And if I did, I was going to respond. I did. I checked it out, so I had access to all the intelligence. He was engaged in those activities. I did respond and made it clear that I'd respond again. With regard to, I always found, and I don't mean to suggest that the press should not know, but this is not a contest about who can do better in front of a press conference or try to embarrass each other. It's about making myself very clear what the conditions are to get a better relationship are with Russia. We're not looking for conflict. We are looking to resolve those actions which we think are inconsistent with international norms, number one. Number two, where we can work together, we may be able to do that in terms of some strategic doctrine that may be able to be worked together. We're ready to do it. And there may be other areas. There's even talk, there may be the ability to work together on climate. So the bottom line is that I think the best way to deal with this is for he and I to meet. he and I to have our discussion. I know you don't doubt that I'll be very straightforward with him about our concerns, and I will make clear my view of how that meeting turned out, and he'll make clear how from his perspective, how it turned out. But I don't want to get into being diverted by did they shake hands, how far did they talk, who talked the most, and the rest. Now, he can say what he said the meeting was about, and I will say what I think the meeting was about. That's how I'm going to handle it.
Okay, thank you.
Follow up on Jim's question. The communique cited a variety of fronts on China, everything from human rights, the origin of the COVID virus, Taiwan. What do you think China needs to do to ease tensions?
I think China has to start to act more responsibly in terms of international norms on human rights and transparency. Transparency matters across the board. And I think the idea that, for example, one of the things I raised and others raised, I wasn't the only one who raised this at the G7, is that we don't know, we haven't had access to the laboratories to determine whether or not, I have not reached a conclusion because our intelligence community is not certain yet, whether or not this was a consequence of from the marketplace of a bat and interfacing with animals in the environment that caused this COVID-19, or whether it was an experiment gone awry in a laboratory. It's important to know the answer to that because we have to have access, we have to build a system whereby we can know when we see another transparent, lack of transparency might produce another another pandemic. We have to have access. The world has to have access. So we're trying to figure out at the G7 whether we could put together an international basis upon which we could have a bottom line with what the transparency accounted for.
I want to ask you about a comment that Vladimir Putin said today, but why do you think he hasn't changed his behavior in spite of everything the U.S. has done to this point?
He's Vladimir Putin. I'm not going to get into much more than that because I've got to sit down with him, and I'll be happy to talk after that. But
what he said to them, just to conclude, today he said that Russia would be ready to hand over cyber criminals to the United States if the U.S. would do the same to Russia. And an agreement came out of this meeting coming up. So are you open to that kind of a trade with Vladimir Putin?
Yes, I'm open to, if there's crimes committed against Russia, that in fact and the people committing those crimes being harbored in the United States, I'm committed to holding them accountable. And I heard that, I was told as I was flying here that he said that. I think that's potentially a good sign and progress. Thank you all very, very much.